Hello everyone, I'm Ash from PlayStation Access, and I am here to just pour out my love for God of War like hot ichor all over this channel. I should say that this is not a definitive, comprehensive breakdown of the game, it is simply a log of my feelings in one big long stream of consciousness, so forgive me for being a little indulgent. In either case, let's get to marvelling at this incredible title, eh? Go on then. For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by myths and monsters. And for as long as I can remember, that fascination has drawn me to the black depths of horror. Horror is a genre born from making us face the things we'd rather not, forcing us to dive into the swirling unknown no matter how scary it feels, regardless of the terrors it might hold. It is personal and it is subjective, a terrible reflection of all of our most unsettling primal instincts. And whilst God of War isn't a horror game, it is a personal horror story, one belonging to Kratos, marked with loss, dangerous exploration, and a past rising up from a freshly laid grave, reanimated to wear the faces of those whose gaze he can't bear to meet. Of course, it is so much more than simply the father and son version of the Babadook, but it is only natural for me to set the scene with some spooky dramatics, right?
Get out of my head.
For a little context, God of War is the 2018 return of the franchise which Kratos has led since its beginnings on PS2. The latest title shifts from God of War's Greek mythological roots to dabble in Norse legend instead, with Kratos tempering his infamous rage in an effort to be a good father and mentor to son Atreus in honour of his late wife, Faye. Together, the two must learn from each other, how to be a human and how to be a god, balancing their duality as they endeavour to spread Faye's ashes from the highest peak in all of the realms. Quite literally a tall order when giants are afoot, it would seem. As for the myths and monsters, these are rife in God of War before we even begin to look at the personal demons of Kratos. And so, I fell in love with a single look at this land filled with ancient stories and otherworldly mysteries. The Kratos we know from the past, one shaped by years of untethered violence and a rage so powerful not even the heavens could stop it, has finally gained control. Or so we're led to believe. It's a second chance, but one built on the back of a complicated, vicious history, and the world around Kratos reflects that at every turn. We're in Midgard, an eerie, empty land scarred by conflict and forgotten to all those that would inhabit it unless they're part of the very wilderness itself. The undead are clambering out of the ground, trolls and dragons roam the mountains, and the world serpent rears his big old head from the waters in greeting. Yet with no one around to tell it, there's a story here that can't be spoken. Instead, we're invited to pick at the edges like a fraying tapestry, collecting what narrative breadcrumbs we can in a realm that has been abandoned by the people who made it. It's reflective of Kratos' own headspace in the opening. He's an ancient Greek legend in a world of Norse mythology after all, and together we must tease out both the history and the future of this strange, storied world by making the picture whole again.
Everything is different, boy. Try not to dwell on it.
Yes, sir.
Truly, the past hangs heavy in this game. From runic passages to gigantic felled statues and war-scarred battlefields, God of War constantly reminds us there's a history to everything, the world around us and the hero with whom we explore it. In both cases, it is a past we have to both learn about and master before we can progress. This is perhaps most obvious in the battle between the light and dark elves in Alfheim, where history threatens to repeat itself again. If I fell in love with God of War in its opening moments, then I committed myself fully to its extraordinary setting upon witnessing Alfheim. This is the first trip we take through Midgard's linked realms, revealing a lush, verdant, elven home caught in an eternal struggle of good versus evil, light versus dark, smothering, choking roots versus glowing botanical delights, as the few inhabitants left are finishing up a brutal war to control the light of the land. The old Kratos soon rears his brooding head in this chapter. He needs the light, and the only way he and we can fathom a way forward is through violence, and so that's what we use. The quest for deeper meaning in a game designed for delighting in combat is a challenge we'll wrestle with throughout. But still, all I could think about on my first playthrough was how much I wanted to know every single detail about the elves as they fight for the light of Alfheim, even if Kratos doesn't care. Whilst Helheim is absolutely more my speed, and Niflheim is where I spent the most time, Alfheim solidified just how vast and deep the lore of this world is, spreading upwards and outwards into a tantalising, inconceivable universe that I desperately want to know everything about. And except I never will. We step outside of the main story for a moment, embroiled in these beautiful, moth-like creatures' war by accident alone, searching for light in their darkness to enable our passage home. We just don't know whether fueling this light is the glorious dawn of peace as the Light Elves reign, or a blinding ray of disaster we've been dazzled by as we deal irreparable damage to the Dark Elves' existence. It's a touch that makes this vacated world feel eerie and unknowable, like an old haunted house that rattles with lives previously lived, ghost stories summoned for a brief moment in time before we step away into the next adventure. If this world feels both familiar and forsaken, its paths well trodden but empty, maybe because that's what we're dealing with here is myth. These are, in the game itself, and in a wider sense too, realms that have existed long before we step foot in them, and will exist long after the game is turned off too.
Of course.
As much as God of War's central storytelling embodies Kratos' development, which of course I will get to, it is also a heartfelt reinterpretation of grand Norse tales passed down through oral tradition. Perhaps my most very favourite part of God of War is how it uses myths and legends for its own ends, adapting and outright changing them to suit the game's purpose in a way that feels natural and Moorish. Myths survive because they're meaningful, and the game summons forth these archetypal images and ideas to make them relevant for a whole new audience. Just like the tales passed down through time in ever-shifting campfire stories, God of War transforms what we know once again, creating different and exciting representations of ancient fables. An alternate history that is both familiar and brand new all at once. With this in mind, I am absolutely a sucker for a magnificent monster, and we get a whole heap of them for Kratos to smash into a fine pulp in God of War. Nightmares feel like a literal interpretation of Old Norse mares, creatures that sit on your chest while you sleep and induce bad dreams, transformed into hideous, ill-fitting eyeball monsters that look plucked from another realm entirely. Revenants look to bear the markings of death by blood eagle, spines down their backs as if cut open in grisly Norse tradition. Hraeslir the dragon is harmed by the sap of Yggdrasil, the world tree, in what I've always taken as a direct reference to Nidhogg the dragon gnawing on its roots in old texts. Everything is curated and created with purpose to make a marvellously immersive world, whether that's from a knowledgeable first playthrough or an inspired reading session afterwards. And oh man, have I had many an inspired reading session from this title, in some fierce quest to suck up every ounce of world buildings that the adventure might never end.
Go ahead.
Sure. Ross.
God of War isn't just about reading though. Sometimes, most times, it's about tearing things to pieces. It should first be said that I've never been a fan of games that require brute perseverance to get through. The challenge is good and necessary, but grinding is just off-putting, and I've always prioritised enjoying a good story over all else. I tell you this so you know that something like the Valkyries would not, in any other game, have tempted me into their brutal combat scenarios. But God of War had me up until 3 AM, crying a bit, dancing around my console as Sigrun ascended to Valhalla and that sweet platinum trophy popped up on my screen. My very first one, which reveals even more about my whole deeply enamoured experience than anything else I could probably say. This is a title that has had me under its frosty spell since I first flung my Leviathan axe, since I first heard Mimir's charming tales, since I uttered my first blissfully naive boy, unprepared for the ones that would follow.
Get in the boat, boy.
It's this constant battle between digging deep into an original world of lore and legends and balanced gameplay that tests and surprises players that makes God of War, in my opinion, the game of its generation. Tearing into enemies, both small and large, feels almost worryingly satisfying, with combat that has been meticulously designed to be intoxicating. The lines between narrative and gameplay blur at every corner in this way, mirroring the constant urge Kratos feels to slip back into comfortable, mindless rage, making all-out destruction temptingly pleasing to enact. We know we shouldn't derive such enjoyment from battering these beasts, or take grim pleasure in wrestling gods across sky and land alike. And it's only when we're forced to stop and face the consequences, our impressionable impact on Atreus, that these choices lay hard and heavy, like a chain binding us to our destiny. A chaos blade to the heart, man. Still though, the combat is delicious, and even with all the narrative guilt in the world, laying waste to everything from tassel worms to travellers never gets old. The game purposefully works against itself to tell a tale of contradictions, of Kratos' true nature versus who he wants to be, and the torturously engrossing combat is the sumptuous, bloody cherry on an incredibly inviting cake, one we want to have and eat too. In Atreus and Kratos, we have a buddy road trip game as it's been described in its truest form, with our two protagonists embracing every human emotion along their tough journey. There's a spiral of hereditary guilt and anger at the heart of God of War, an undercurrent that threatens to pull Kratos and his son under the waves and spit them out right back where they started.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
The moral, spiritual battle at the center of this masterwork is a constant, emotionally battering pressure to be better, do better, even if that means opening old wounds so they can heal properly with the right care. I am no father, clearly, but I felt every ache of Kratos' begrudging body as he drags it into leading a better life for his family, and every shameful, painful flash of his past he wants to protect his son from. I mean, we literally go to hell and back to prove it.
You will honor your mother and abandon this path you have chosen.
Putting the effect this game had on me during my first playthrough into words is an almost impossible task, and there's certainly parts I've skipped over that deserve more praise than I can conjure in one measly video. The absolutely mind-blowing single-shot camera kept all the way through deserves a shout-out at the very, very least. Jormungandr, the biggest and best snake going, whose voice brings me nothing but joy. Mimir, most treasured head in all the lands, the perfectly paced challenges that feel a natural part of progression, the outfits, the personalisation, Baldur's story, and tattoos, our dwarven friends, the incredible chest-thumping soundtrack. Really, there is so much I love here. I started this out pointing out the inherent horror of Kratos' journey, a man facing an army of zombies, who ends up in hell no less, who is forced to face all of his nightmares in one treacherous adventure. He loses his wife, he almost loses his son, both physically and mentally once he learns his true heritage. He's forced to exhume a past that has been laid to rest and hidden, literal ghosts haunting his mind in a psychological battering ram that almost sends him over the edge.
You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
He's faced with a challenge that can't be solved by strength or rage, having to understand his fists can't pulverise his problems this time around, even if he does have an aggressive talent for brutality any slasher villain would be proud of. God of War is more than that though. It's grief counselling, parenthood, strength. It's the keen sense of a child's curiosity forever driving us forwards, learning and growing with Atreus. It is seeing our most feared outcome and charging headfirst into it anyway, willing to change it by brute force alone. Everything I love about this game is everything that's inherent to the best storytellers out there. The ability to take us on a heartfelt adventure wrapped up in layers and layers of adept world building, with a few monsters to boot. God of War is both Kratos' journey and our own. Character development for a man who was only ever one note, whilst letting players colour in our own discoveries around the edges. Loading up this title feels like loading up a unique world of destructive possibilities. But importantly, as someone that is very soft and emotional, it brings me such joy to see those same qualities instilled in a character known for his hard, stoic approach. Kratos' growth and maturation is a tale of allowing oneself to feel, even if there's enough feeling to drown any normal person facing the challenges he does. He opens up, he loves, he explores, he might even laugh. Lessons from humanity and the legacy of Fae that he finally uses to heal a past he was never up to facing alone. That's okay though, because we're right there with him. God of War hit me like a stone ancient to the face, and the story I was taken on will stay with me forever. Quite simply then, it will always be my favourite title on PlayStation 4. Boy, is it a brilliant game. Woof, well, there is my heart song on God of War blurted out in all of its glory. If you want to hear other tales of interest about everyone else's favourite games, then take a look at Rob's Skyrim video and Nath's The Witcher 3 video, and keep an eye out for Rosie's Bloodborne video to come. They're all really, really good. We're all big RPG dorks. If you liked this, then know that Control was runner-up. God bless Jesse Faden. Otherwise, I've been Ash, this has been PlayStation Access, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more PlayStation goodness. Thanks for watching.